Check it out, Casper!
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in, Casper here, and welcome back to TF2 Best Loadouts, the series where we look at the best loadouts for each class, in my humble opinion, and talk about how you can best utilise the advantages and mitigate the disadvantages of playing with these setups. Today we're looking at everyone's favourite silent psychopath, the Pyro. Pyro is an often debated class in the TF2 community, simultaneously being considered overpowered and requiring no skill by many, and underpowered whilst having no real defined role by others. Regardless of your viewpoint, it's fair to say that Pyro is a short-range class who excels at doing a little bit of damage to a lot of people, and a class who stands quite firmly in the high-risk, high-reward style of attack due to requiring close range to deal damage. Given that getting into close range combat with multiple enemies is almost guaranteed death in a game such as Team Fortress 2, we want to set up our Pyro in a way to maximise his/her 1 versus 1 potential. Therefore, we want a weapon or combination of weapons which will allow us to output a lot of damage as quickly as possible, as well as anything which will allow us to get in and out of these fights as quickly as possible. Primary, the degreaser. That's right, for the primary we've got the degreaser. Now, the main reasons for choosing this weapon will become clear as this list goes on, but the fact of the matter is that its weaknesses just aren't that much of a big deal, despite how severe they may first sound. Firstly, let's consider the minus 66% afterburn damage. This reduces the afterburn damage. The damage done to someone who has already been lit on fire is reduced from 6 per second down to 2 per second. Whilst this is obviously a significant proportion, we need to consider the amount of times that we get kills from afterburn damage at all. Does this attribute mean we'll get kills less often with afterburn? Sure, but we absolutely should not be relying on afterburn for kills. Ideally, we kill before afterburn even kicks in. Later in the loadout, we'll discuss the important thing is simply that there is afterburn at all. The second negative of this weapon is minus 25% air blast cost, meaning that an air blast uses up 25 ammo instead of just 20. As a commenter once pointed out to me when this nerf was first introduced, that this is actually the difference between 10 or 8 extinguishers / reflect attempts at full ammo. Given that you're unlikely to be at full ammo and make 8 air blast attempts in a row without flaming even once, then the reality is that it's actually more likely to be the difference between 9 or 8 air blasts. Ultimately, the difference is negligible, and on the occasions that this does catch you with your pants down and no ammo in your weapon, then there's a high chance that you'd be in a pretty similar situation with the default anyway. So of course, those are the negatives of this weapon, so we must be using it for its single positive attribute, its switch speed. 60% faster switch to bring it out, and more importantly, 30% faster to holster. Faster holstering speeds means we can get to either our secondary or our melee weapon quicker whilst using this as our primary. So let's talk about our secondary to understand just why the hell this is so important. Secondary, the flare gun. Our secondary weapon is the flare gun. In terms of raw damage, the flare gun is actually outclassed by the shotguns in all but the very longest ranges. Even then, it does shoot a projectile as opposed to the shotgun's hit scan, which inherently makes it that much more difficult to successfully land a shot. Of course, the flare gun does have the bonus effect of lighting your opponent on fire for up to 10 seconds, which is the potential of 60 damage assuming they don't find any healing source during that time. So afterburn kills are a possibility, but as we discussed with the degreaser, we should never be relying on afterburn for kills. The real advantage of the flare gun comes from the fact that it critical hits against burning players. This is the main reason that we chose the degreaser as our primary weapon. A very quickly executed combo between lighting someone on fire with the degreaser, switching to the flare gun, and shooting them results in 90 damage for the critical flare shot, as well as 1 or 2 seconds of afterburn damage from the initial degreaser lighting on fire. The combination of all that results in taking out any 125 base health class before they've really even had a chance to react. A powerful addition to this strategy is also to air blast the opponent before switching to shoot your flare gun. This result is twofold. 1, it's easier for you to predict where they're going to be and therefore aim your flare because you just blasted them in that direction. And 2, it stuns the enemy in a way which makes it much harder for them to react efficiently. It's not a flawless strategy and it definitely takes practice. However, it's one which I wholeheartedly recommend taking the time to learn the subtle movements and timings involved, because executing a lot of damage in as little time as possible is a highly effective strategy for a kill hunting Pyro. Now that's not to say that crowd control and annoyance aren't very useful strategies for a Pyro to employ, but in public servers where teamwork is a myth and individual performance is the root of all enjoyment, then this tactic is definitely my recommendation. If you've been paying any attention to the background gameplay, you hopefully will have noticed the potential for power! Melee, the Power Jack. Our melee of choice to complete this assassin Pyro loadout is the Power Jack. If you've been around this channel a while, you will know my stance on melee weapons when it comes to loadout choice. A melee weapon has a very short range, and it's usually only good for a few reasons. Reason number 1, you're in a desperate situation. For example, you're empty ammo on your primary and your secondary. 2, it's better at close range than your guns. For example, if you're a soldier or a demo man. Or reason number 3, it's got some sort of utility value. Reason number 1 is reasonable. You can always run out of ammo on your primary or your secondary, albeit unlikely. Reason number 2, picking a melee weapon due to close range doesn't really apply to Pyro, based on the fact that the Pyro's primary is the most optimized to close range of all the primaries in the game. And this is especially true for our loadout because we're using the flare gun to optimize our critical hit damage. And of course, aiming those flare shots is going to be much easier if your opponent is in close range. So that leaves us with the utility value. What utility value does the Power Jack have? Well, I would claim it's one of the most important things in all of Team Fortress 2. Movement speed increase. Now that's not to say that movement speed is the most important thing, but movement in general. There's a reason that Scout, Soldier and Demo Man are the attacking classes of choice in the competitive world of Team Fortress. And of course, whilst their damage output is a strong factor in that, it's definitely not a coincidence that they've all got extremely fast and agile mobility options. Even though the Power Jack only gives us 15% extra speed, it is still 15% faster access to the front lines, 15% faster retreat to the defensive lines, and in many cases, 15% extra chance to get out of an otherwise deadly situation. Although this weapon does have the negative of 20% extra damage vulnerability when drawn, if you consider the main scenarios when we'll have this weapon active, then you'll see that this isn't really an issue. First scenario is when we're advancing to the front line. In these cases, we're very unlikely to engage with an enemy unless they're out of position. However, if they are out of position and we have to engage them, then we've still got the chance to hit them for 65 damage per shot, whilst also taking advantage of the fact that the Power Jack gives us plus 25 health on kill. Alternatively, in this situation, we could switch to our degreaser. Because we're using the degreaser and not any other flamethrower, we are able to make this weapon switch extremely quickly due to the 60% switch to speed that the degreaser has. So it's perfect for situations like this. The second scenario where we'll have the Power Jack out is when we're falling back or retreating. In both these situations, we're likely to be on low health anyway, or at the very least, we're being chased by an enemy. Similar to the escape plan as a soldier, in these situations, we'll likely be on low health to the point where 20% extra damage isn't going to make the difference. You would have died anyway, even if you weren't taking extra damage. And on the flip side of that, this extra speed will result in many situations where this speed lets us escape, where we absolutely wouldn't have without it. And in my personal experience, these escape situations will far outweigh the rare situations where that 20% extra damage does result in a death. So a quick recap of our loadout. We've got the degreaser because it's got extremely fast switch times. We've got the flare gun because we can utilize those switch times of the degreaser to quickly get out that 90 critical hit damage. Combined with the flame damage that we've been doing with the degreaser anyway, we're going to be killing 125 health classes very quickly. And finally for the melee, it's the Power Jack due to the fact that it increases our speed. Whilst each of these items do have their own drawbacks and limits, because we use them all together and we make sure that we're using them in the correct situations, none of those negatives are going to massively affect us once we learn how to play this way. So that's my personal opinion on what is the best Pyro loadout to use in the most situations in this game, especially in pub servers. If you are playing with a team, an organised team like a Highlander team, you might want to swap things out a bit to best optimize your role within that team. But in an environment where you're mostly playing for your own enjoyment, then this is definitely a very powerful role to play. I hope everybody's enjoying this series, and I'll definitely be continuing it. And keep an eye on this channel over the next couple of weeks, because we will be having a channel update coming soon to give you a bit of an idea of where we're going. There's a couple of suggested videos on the screen right now, so check those out if you haven't seen them already. And if you have seen them, watch them again. Thanks everybody, and goodbye.
Someone told me that I'm special.